There is a moment, and every person alive has felt it, when the world looks you dead in the eyes and tells you that you are not enough. Not good enough, not tall enough, not experienced enough, not ready enough. And in that moment, the whole direction of a life gets decided. Not by the person doing the rejecting, but by the one being rejected. What they do next. What burns inside them in the hours after the door closes in their face. Michael Jordan knows that moment. He has lived it more than once. And what happened each time the world said no to him is the reason you are here listening to this story. But before I tell you what really happened in those rooms, on those courts, in those silences where a young man had to decide who he was going to be, I need you to understand one thing. The story you think you know about Michael Jordan is not the full story. There are details that got buried, moments that never made the highlight reels, decisions made in the dark that shaped everything that came after. And one of them, the one almost no one talks about, happened in a high school gym in Wilmington, North Carolina, in the autumn of 1978. That is where this story begins. Laney High School was not a place where legends were born. It was a public school in a mid-sized coastal city, the kind of school where most kids drifted through and moved on to ordinary lives. Basketball was serious there, the way basketball is always serious in the American South, but the Laney Buccaneers were not a dynasty. They were a good team, occasionally a very good team. And in 1978, the varsity roster had space for perhaps one more player, one more body that could contribute, that could compete, that could help the team win games. The tryouts were held over several afternoons in October. Dozens of boys competed for those spots. They ran drills, they scrimmaged, they showed everything they had. And when the list went up on the gymnasium wall, that piece of paper taped to the bulletin board that every kid in every school in America has dreaded at some point, a 15-year-old sophomore named Michael Jordan walked up to read it. He scanned the names once, then again. He stepped closer, as if maybe he had missed something, as if his name might appear if he just looked harder. It was not there. His name was not there. The varsity coach, a man named Pop Herring, had looked at the thin, wiry sophomore and decided he was not ready, not mature enough physically, not polished enough technically. There was another player, a boy named Leroy Smith, who was taller, and the team needed height. So Leroy Smith made the list, Michael Jordan did not. What happened in the next few minutes is a small piece of history that most people gloss over, because it does not fit the mythology. The mythology says Jordan shrugged it off, got angry in a productive way, used it as fuel from day one. The truth is more human than that. Michael Jordan walked out of that gymnasium, went home and cried. He told his mother he had been cut. Dolores Jordan held her son and cried with him because she could see how much it hurt, and because she knew that sometimes the right response to pain is to feel it fully before you decide what to do with it. He told her he did not want to play basketball anymore, that the coach did not like him, that there was no point. And here is where the story turns, not because of what Michael did, but because of what his mother said. She did not tell him the coach was wrong. She did not tell him it was a mistake, that he was already great, that the world would soon recognize him. She told him something simpler and more true. She told him that if he wanted to prove something, there was only one way to do it. Get back in the gym. Work. She said, show them. That was it. Show them. He carried those two words for the rest of his life. What followed that autumn and winter is the foundation of everything. Michael Jordan joined the junior varsity team and became something that none of the varsity players could have predicted, a problem. He was not just good on the JV squad, he was dominant in a way that started to embarrass the system that had excluded him. Word spread around the school. People started showing up to JV games, which almost never happened, because this kid from the sophomore class was doing things that did not look like high school basketball. He was scoring 40 points in games, sometimes more. He was playing with a ferocity that felt personal, because it was personal. Every single game he played that season, he played against the ghost of that list on the gymnasium wall, against the name that was not there, against the boy named Leroy Smith who had taken his spot. Every night in the driveway of his family's home, after dinner in the dark, he was out there with the ball. His mother would look out the window at 10, 11 o'clock at night, and Michael Jordan would still be out there, the sound of the dribble steady as a heartbeat against the pavement, working, proving, building something that no one could see yet, but that he could feel growing inside him with every hour he put in. There is a story from that JV season that captures something essential. There was a game in January 1979, a weeknight game against another school in the area, a game that meant nothing in the standings. Michael Jordan scored 42 points. 42 points in a junior varsity basketball game, with the full intensity of a man who had something to prove to every person in the building and every person who was not in the building. The JV coach, a younger man who recognized something rare when he saw it, started talking to Pop Herring about his sophomore. He said, "Coach, this kid belongs on your floor." Herring had already been hearing it from others, teachers, parents, other players. There was a buzz around Laney High School that the kid who had not made the varsity list was doing something unusual on the JV court. But Pop Herring was a proud man, and proud men do not reverse course quickly or easily. He watched from a distance. He acknowledged the noise without acting on it, and Michael Jordan played on and accumulated more points and earned more whispers and continued to build the thing he was building. By the spring of that school year, Pop Herring had begun to understand what he had done. He would occasionally bring Michael along to practice with the varsity team, watch him run with the older players, watch how he competed. And what Herring saw was unsettling in the best possible way. This kid who he had passed over was playing at or above the level of the boys he had chosen. Over the summer, between Michael's sophomore and junior years, something else happened. He grew. Not a little, substantially. He added inches of height and transformed physically into the athlete whose outline you would begin to recognize. And when junior year tryouts came around, there was no list to dread, no moment of waiting and scanning. Michael Jordan walked onto the Laney varsity floor as a matter of inevitability. He had made it impossible for anyone to say no a second time. In his first varsity game, he scored 35 points. People in the stands looked at each other with the specific expression of those who realize they are watching something that is not going to stay local for long. By his senior year, he was the best high school basketball player in the state of North Carolina. He was named a McDonald's All-American. College coaches from across the country were calling the school. The boy who had not made the list was now the list. And the thing that drove him, that quiet burning engine that ran on rejection, was just getting started. Dean Smith saw something in Michael Jordan that not everyone could see. The head coach at the University of North Carolina was one of the most respected and successful coaches in the history of college basketball, a man who had built a program on discipline, intelligence, and team-first philosophy. When he recruited Jordan to Chapel Hill in 1981, he did not promise him the starring role. He promised him an education in basketball and in everything else. He told Jordan's mother and father that he would graduate their son, and he meant it. The Jordan family trusted him, and in the fall of 1981, Michael Jordan arrived at the University of North Carolina as a freshman with something to prove that had nothing to do with championships. He had to prove that he belonged at this level, that the coaches and scouts who had believed in him were right, that the transition from high school star to college player would not expose some hidden limitation. In his first practice with the Tar Heels, veteran players who were 2 and 3 years older than him took a look at the skinny freshman and sized him up the way older players always size up the younger ones. They were not impressed immediately. Jordan did not walk into Chapel Hill fully formed. He was still growing, still learning, still becoming the player he would be. What followed over that first semester was a quiet but total awakening. Jordan competed in practice with a ferocity that unsettled the older players. He was not polished in every aspect of the game, but the athleticism, the speed, the competitive instinct, those were already beyond what most players of any age possessed. Dean Smith watched and made adjustments. He found ways to use Jordan's gifts within the team structure, while also demanding that Jordan subordinate his individual impulses to the collective. For a player who had spent years motivated by personal rejection and personal vindication, learning to trust a system was genuinely difficult. But Jordan trusted Dean Smith, and that trust became one of the formative disciplines of his career. His freshman year alone contained a moment that would have been enough to define most careers. The national championship game in 1982, played in the Louisiana Superdome in New Orleans, the Tar Heels against Patrick Ewing and the Georgetown Hoyas. With 17 seconds left, North Carolina trailing by 1, Dean Smith called a timeout. The gym held nearly 60,000 people. The noise was a physical thing, a pressure against the chest. Smith drew up the play in the huddle. He called Jordan's number. He looked at his 18-year-old freshman and said the play was his. The ball came to Jordan on the left wing. He caught it, squared up, released. The ball went in. The celebration that followed was the first time Michael Jordan felt an entire world watching him. James Jordan, his father, found him afterward and said, "Your life will never be the same after that shot, son." He was right. It never was. But here is what the highlight reels never show you. In those same 3 years at North Carolina, Michael Jordan was not universally declared the next great player. Dean Smith ran a system, and in that system, no individual player dominated. Jordan was elite within the structure, but critics and analysts watching from the outside sometimes wondered aloud whether his talent was inflated by the quality of the program around him. When he averaged under 18 points per game in his junior season, some observers wrote that his scoring was being suppressed, that he was not truly a transcendent scorer, that his ceiling was limited. One prominent scouting report circulated among NBA front offices characterized him as a high-level college player, whose explosiveness may not translate to the professional game given his relatively slight frame and dependence on athleticism over technique. That report existed. Those words were written about Michael Jordan, and somewhere in whatever file cabinet or archive those scouting reports live in, they remain, a document that aged about as well as anything in the history of professional sports evaluation. When Jordan entered the 1984 NBA draft, he did so having won a national championship, 2 All-American selections, the Naismith Award as the best player in college basketball. He was, by any reasonable measure, the most complete player available. And yet on draft night, he fell to the 3rd pick. The Houston Rockets selected Hakeem Olajuwon first overall. That was the correct pick. Olajuwon would become one of the greatest centers in the history of the game, and the Rockets needed a center. There is no argument with that selection. The controversy, the one that will be debated until the last basketball is deflated, came with the 2nd pick. The Portland Trail Blazers held that pick. Portland already had a young shooting guard named Clyde Drexler, a player of genuine talent and potential. What Portland felt they needed was size, a center to anchor their front court. And so, at pick number 2 in the 1984 NBA draft, the Portland Trail Blazers selected Sam Bowie, a 7'1" center from Kentucky. Sam Bowie was a good player. He had been excellent in college before a series of injuries interrupted his development. But he was not, as history has definitively confirmed, the 2nd best player in that draft class. The 3rd pick was Michael Jordan, taken by the Chicago Bulls. There are accounts from people in the room that night who said Jordan's expression never changed when Bowie's name was called and his did not. He sat there and absorbed it with the stillness of a man who had trained for exactly this. For the moment when the world told him he was not the first choice, not the obvious choice, not the chosen one. He had been there before. He knew what to do with it. The Chicago Bulls in 1984 were, by any polite description, a struggling franchise. The team had not made the playoffs in 5 years. Their record the previous season had been 27 wins and 55 losses. The United Center did not exist yet. They played in the Chicago Stadium, an old arena on the west side of the city, and they played to crowds that were frequently less than half full. The city of Chicago had largely moved on from the Bulls. The team was an afterthought. Some reporters in the city covered them the way you might cover a minor league team, with mild curiosity and no real expectation of drama. Michael Jordan arrived into this environment on October 26, 1984, for his first professional game against the Washington Bullets. He scored 16 points in that debut, which was fine but not seismic. The response from the local press was cautious. He was good, they said, maybe very good. But the NBA was a different level, and the Bulls were still the Bulls, and let's see how the season went before anyone got carried away. What followed over that first season made the caution look ridiculous in retrospect. Jordan averaged 28 points per game. He was electric in a way that crowds had not seen in that building in years. He won the Rookie of the Year award. He made the All-Star game as a starter. The Bulls improved by 11 wins. He was not just good, he was transforming the franchise in real time. And yet, even as the individual brilliance became undeniable, a narrative was taking shape that would follow Michael Jordan for the next 6 years and form the longest, most painful chapter of his early career. The narrative went like this. Michael Jordan was a scorer, a spectacular, extraordinary scorer, possibly the most gifted scorer the game had ever seen. But he was selfish with the ball. He shot too much. He did not make his teammates better. He was the kind of player who put up 35 points and still lost in the first round of the playoffs. And what did that ultimately mean? This was the criticism. It came from writers, from analysts, from other players, from executives around the league. Some of it was fair. The Bulls around Jordan in those early years were genuinely not a talented supporting cast, and a team without talent loses in the first round, regardless of how spectacular one player is. But some of the criticism was something else. It was the specific discomfort that certain people feel when someone is so good, so obviously exceptional, that they search for a way to diminish it. Michael Jordan made other players look ordinary by comparison, and some of those ordinary players had the microphone and used it. The 1985 All-Star Game crystallized this dynamic in a way that Jordan would carry with him for years. He had been voted into the game as a starter. The fans had seen enough in the first months of his rookie season to put him on the Eastern Conference roster. He was 21 years old, the brightest new star in the league, and he was going to the All-Star Game in Indianapolis with the energy and excitement of a young man who had worked his entire life for exactly this moment. What happened in that game became known in the years after as the freeze-out. Michael Jordan touched the ball in that game like a man standing in a room where everyone else has agreed not to pass to him, because that is exactly what it was. He scored 7 points in 22 minutes. 6 of his Eastern Conference teammates scored more than he did. He attempted 9 shots. There were veterans on that team, seasoned players, men with rings and reputations, who made a collective decision in the days before that game that the rookie was not going to come in and take the stage away from them. The chief architect of that decision, by most accounts, was Isaiah Thomas, the brilliant and calculating point guard of the Detroit Pistons. The story circulated for days after the game. Jordan found out about it when a reporter told him what he had heard. That incident was one of the most painful experiences of my life up to that point, Jordan would say years later. I was so disillusioned I didn't know what to do. He went home, he sat with it, and then he did what he always did with pain. He went back to work. Here is the part that no one anticipated, because it required understanding something about Michael Jordan that his critics fundamentally missed. He did not need their approval. He did not need their respect. He did not need them to believe in him. What he needed was for them to doubt him, because doubt was the most powerful fuel he had ever found. Every dismissal, every slight, every vote of no confidence went into a furnace inside him that burned hotter with each addition. The freeze-out in Indianapolis did not break Michael Jordan. It broke open something in him that needed to come out. The night after the All-Star Game, the Bulls played the Detroit Pistons at home in Chicago. Michael Jordan played like a man who had been saving something up for exactly this occasion. He was furious and focused in the specific combination that made him unlike any player before him. The Bulls won in overtime in a game that was physical enough to nearly start multiple fights. And Jordan had made his statement, not with words, not with interviews, not with any public performance of grievance, with the ball, with his body, with the thing he could control absolutely. That was always how it went. Every time someone laughed, he scored. Every time someone doubted, he dominated. Every time someone said he was not enough, he became more. But the cruelest chapter was still coming. Because Michael Jordan could beat individual opponents. He could beat an Isaiah Thomas who froze him out. He could beat a coach who cut him from a list. He could beat a front office that made him the 3rd pick. What he could not yet beat in those first years was the Detroit Pistons as a system. Chuck Daly, the Detroit head coach, was a brilliant tactician. He watched the way Michael Jordan played and did something that nobody had done before him in quite the same way. He built a defensive philosophy designed entirely around one man. They called it the Jordan rules. The concept was comprehensive and merciless. Every time Michael Jordan touched the ball, two defenders collapsed on him. If he drove to the basket, he was met with physical force, legal and sometimes not quite legal in the era when referees allowed more. Bill Laimbeer threw elbows. Dennis Rodman fouled with intent. Rick Mahorn used his body like a weapon. The message was consistent and clear. You will pay a price for every basket. We will wear you down. We will make this hurt. And in 1988, 1989, and 1990, the Detroit Pistons eliminated the Chicago Bulls from the playoffs 3 consecutive times. 3 years, 3 losses, 3 off-seasons where Michael Jordan went home without the only thing that would quiet the critics: a championship. Michael Jordan can't win the big one. That was the sentence that appeared in newspapers, on radio shows, in conversations around water coolers in Chicago and across the country. He is great individually, but the Bulls will never win with him as the centerpiece, because he holds the ball too much, because he is not Magic Johnson, because he is not Larry Bird, because greatness of that individual kind does not translate to championship basketball. That was the verdict. It was delivered confidently, repeatedly, by people who were absolutely certain of its truth. What the critics could not see, what they had no access to, because it happened in practice facilities and film sessions and quiet conversations, was that Michael Jordan was changing. Not in spite of the pressure, but because of it. Phil Jackson arrived as the Bulls' head coach in 1989, and with him came the triangle offense, a system that required Jordan to trust his teammates, to let the ball move, to give up the isolation plays that had produced his scoring numbers and accept a different role. Jackson would later write that asking Jordan to take fewer shots was the most difficult conversation of his coaching career. Jordan resisted. He had built everything on the certainty of his own ability, on knowing that when the game was on the line, the ball needed to be in his hands. The triangle asked him to believe that when the ball was not in his hands, his teammates could deliver. That required a kind of faith he had never been asked to have, and yet he found it. Slowly, painfully, with friction and argument and late-night film sessions, where Jackson showed him moments in games where a pass would have produced a better outcome than a shot, Jordan evolved. Scottie Pippen was growing into a player of remarkable versatility and intelligence. Horace Grant was developing as a rebounder and defender. The pieces were assembling, and each year the Bulls got closer. The 1991 Eastern Conference Finals, Chicago versus Detroit again. The bad boys, the bullies, the team that had broken the Bulls in 3 consecutive years. But this time, something was different from the opening tip-off. The Bulls were not the team they had been. They were more patient, more organized, more willing to distribute the ball and grind through a defensive possession. And Michael Jordan, while still producing at a level that defied description, was playing within the system rather than above it. The Pistons won Game 1, and for a moment, the old doubt flickered. Here we go again, the narrative reasserting itself. But then the Bulls won 4 games in a row. They swept the Pistons out of the playoffs, and the image that became famous from that series was of the Detroit players walking off the floor without congratulating the Bulls, without handshakes, without the acknowledgement that usually passes between competitors. It was a revealing moment. Even in defeat, the Pistons could not recognize what was happening, but the rest of the country could. And when the Bulls met the Los Angeles Lakers in the NBA Finals, when Michael Jordan averaged 31 points and 11 assists per game, when he held the Larry O'Brien trophy for the first time, the locker room afterward was not a place of wild celebration. It was quieter than that. There was crying, yes. Jordan held the trophy and wept openly, the tears of a man who had carried something heavy for a very long time and was only now allowed to set it down. Scottie Pippen, who had been alongside him through the years of defeat and frustration, came and embraced him. Phil Jackson stood nearby and said nothing, because nothing needed to be said. The room understood what the moment meant. It was not just a championship. It was the demolition of a narrative. The saying was Chicago Bulls would never win with Michael Jordan being the scoring leader, he said later. So it was gratifying to see the so-called perfect critics who knew the game were totally wrong about me. What followed over the next 7 years was a dynasty so complete and dominant that it reshaped the entire culture of professional basketball. The Bulls won again in 1992, again in 1993. Jordan shocked the world by retiring after his father's murder. James Jordan, the man who had told his son his life would never be the same after that championship shot, was killed in the summer of 1993. And Michael Jordan, without the person whose belief had anchored him since childhood, stepped away from the game and tried to honor his father by playing minor league baseball, another sport they had shared. He came back in 1995, rusty and different, but still himself in the ways that mattered most. And then came the 1995 and 96 season, the 72-win season, the season that is still discussed as possibly the greatest single-year performance by a team in the history of the sport. 3 more championships, 6 total. The last one in 1998, the last dance, the final shot, a jumper over Brian Russell in the final seconds of Game 6 to win the title, a moment so perfect it looked choreographed, because by then Michael Jordan had done this so many times that winning had begun to look inevitable even when it was not. 6 championships, that is the number. 6 in 8 years, with 2 separate three-peats that stand as the most dominant sustained run in the history of the sport. 5 Most Valuable Player awards, 6 Finals MVP awards, 10 scoring titles, 14 All-Star selections. Numbers so absolute and comprehensive that they ended the argument about who the greatest basketball player of all time was, not by proclamation, but by accumulated evidence that no serious person could dispute. Larry Bird, who once scored 63 points against him in a playoff game, a game the Bulls lost, had stood in the Garden afterward and told the assembled press, "That was God disguised as Michael Jordan." Magic Johnson, whose Lakers dynasty Jordan's Bulls overtook, would say that there was Michael Jordan, and then there was everyone else. These were not tributes offered by fans or sycophants. They came from competitors, from men who had gone to battle against him and returned with the specific awe of soldiers who have faced something they could not fully comprehend. And Pop Herring, the Laney High School coach who had looked at a 15-year-old sophomore and decided he was not ready for the varsity list, Pop Herring watched all of it from Wilmington, North Carolina, and understood in the way that most people only understand things in retrospect, that the decision he made in 1978 had not held Michael Jordan back. It had, accidentally, perfectly, launched him. There is a detail about that original list on the gymnasium wall at Laney High School that Jordan mentioned in his Hall of Fame induction speech in 2009. He was standing at the podium in Springfield, Massachusetts, surrounded by the greatest players in the history of basketball, accepting the highest individual honor the sport could give him. He had been working on his speech for weeks, and the people in his life had tried to prepare him for the gravity of the moment, told him to be gracious, to thank the people who had helped him, to keep the emotion in check. And Michael Jordan did all of those things. He thanked his family, he thanked Dean Smith, he thanked his teammates, and then he brought up Leroy Smith, the man whose name had appeared on the list, where Michael Jordan's had not. He brought it up standing at the pinnacle of the basketball world, with 6 rings on the record and a legacy that would outlast everyone in the room. He brought it up because he needed to, because Leroy Smith was still there, still living in the furnace. It was a moment that surprised some people, that made others uncomfortable, that led to criticism that he was holding a grudge too long, that it was unbecoming to relitigate a high school slight from the stage in Springfield. But those critics had missed the point entirely. Jordan was not relitigating, he was explaining. He was telling the room, and through the room the world, how it actually works, how greatness is actually built, not from talent alone, not from opportunity alone, not from coaching or circumstance or good fortune, but from the ability to take every moment of rejection and doubt and convert it into something that does not go away. He was saying, this is what it took. This is what I used. And I am still using it, standing here right now. Because that is the thing about Michael Jordan that transcends the championships and the scoring titles and the shoes and the commercials and the cultural icon status. The thing that matters most for anyone who is not a professional basketball player and never will be. The thing is this: he was told no. He was told he was not enough, not ready, not the right choice. He was frozen out by veterans who saw his talent and felt threatened by it. He was rejected by a draft that placed him third when he should have been first. He was criticized for years by people who watched him play at a level they could not achieve and found a way to frame it as a flaw. He was beaten, physically and in the standings, by a team that built an entire defensive system for the specific purpose of stopping him. And none of it stopped him. All of it became the material from which he built the most complete basketball career in the history of the sport. Every no became the architecture of a yes so overwhelming that the word no eventually lost its power entirely. Here is what that means for you right now, wherever you are listening to this. You have had a list on a gymnasium wall. You have had the name that was not there, the door that closed before you reached it, the opportunity that went to someone else. You know what that feels like, the specific heat of it, the way it sits in you and demands to be answered. And the question that Michael Jordan's life poses, directly and without softening, is this: what do you do with that heat? Because most people let it cool. Most people let the rejection become a conclusion rather than a beginning. They allow the no to define the ceiling, to draw the boundaries of what is possible, to settle into a quiet acceptance that maybe the world was right and they were not ready, and that is just how it goes. Michael Jordan was not most people. He never once allowed the rejection to draw the boundary. Every time a boundary appeared, he used it as the address of the next place he needed to be. And that is not a basketball lesson. That is not a lesson about athleticism or talent, or the specific gift of being 6 feet 6 inches tall and able to move the way he moved. That is a lesson about the architecture of a mind, about the decision, made again and again across decades, from a driveway in Wilmington to a championship podium in Chicago, to make fuel out of fire. The young people who grew up watching Michael Jordan in the 1990s are in their 30s and 40s now, and many of them became coaches and parents and teachers and mentors, and they are passing this story on, not always by name, not always with the specific details about the Laney High School list, or the All-Star freeze-out, or the 3 consecutive losses to the Detroit Pistons. But the essence of it, the idea that rejection does not have to be an ending, that doubt is something you can use, that the people who bet against you are not obstacles but ingredients, that essence travels. It gets into young people and changes the way they see their own setbacks. A kid who gets cut from a team hears this story and thinks, okay, that is not the end. It might be the beginning. That is the gift Michael Jordan left behind that has nothing to do with trophies. Isaiah Thomas watched the Bulls win their first championship from a television somewhere in Detroit, and whatever was in his mind in that moment, whatever complex mixture of regret and respect and stubborn pride, only he knows. But the freeze-out in Indianapolis had not stopped Michael Jordan. It had added another log to the fire. If this story reached something in you, if it landed somewhere that feels personal, somewhere you recognize from your own life, then do something with that feeling. Leave a comment. Tell this community what your gymnasium wall moment was. Tell us what the list looked like that did not have your name on it, and what you did next and where you are now. Because the stories that matter most are not just the ones about Michael Jordan. They are the ones about you. And if you are not yet subscribed to this channel, this is the moment. This is the channel where these stories live. The real ones, the ones with enough detail and depth to actually matter. The ones that go past the highlights and into the rooms where the decisions were made. Subscribe if you believe that the deepest stories are the ones that change the way you think about your own life. Subscribe if you have been told no and need to be reminded of what no actually is. Subscribe if you think the greatest athlete in the history of basketball was not just a man with extraordinary talent, but a man with an extraordinary relationship to adversity. And that relationship is something you can learn from, something you can use. Because in the end, that is what Michael Jordan was. Not just a basketball player, not just a champion. He was proof that the list on the wall is not the verdict. It is just the beginning of the work. And the work, relentless daily, driven by something that does not cool and does not quit, is what builds the legacy. Get back in the gym. That is what his mother told him. He listened. The rest is the story you already know, and the one you are still writing.